He excoriated her as stupid and corrupt. And then he couldn't leave the room without leaning on her for support. We're putting that barn in Wisconsin on the couch. The escalating affect. The moment where arguments stop becoming rational and become something more primitive. If you've been watching this man for any length of time, you know that this behavior isn't new. What was new was the absence of anything between him and the camera. Every accountability structure we've watched him navigate, the press events with the apparatus around him, the rallies where the crowd itself is the holding environment, and all the other settings where the staff and the protocols flatten down the edges somewhat. All of it exists in part to make sure that what happened yesterday doesn't happen in public. Then that barn stripped it all away. A journalist, a camera, rain hitting the roof hard, no apparatus, no buffer, no one whose job it was to agree. What you saw in Wisconsin was not an anomaly. What you saw was the unmediated version of what is always happening, just without the walls around it. In private, the people around him absorb this on a daily basis with no camera, no off-ramp, no ability to push back. In the last episode, we talked about the folie à deux mechanism, the shared delusion. Well, this is on the other side of that. What happens to the sycophancy system who's doing his reality testing? What they are enduring on a day-to-day basis, that prolonged exposure to that level of dysregulation. So all they can do is agree. Kristen Welker had one interview. Those people live there. Welcome to the world on the couch, where we put the daily news cycle through a psychological lens, because that's the part the news almost always misses. And yes, they've been missing it. I'm Dr. Marlene Ryle. I'm a psychologist and a psychiatric nurse practitioner with 30 years of experience in the field. What we're doing today is going to be analysis and commentary, not clinical diagnosis. The interview was contentious from the start. Welker kept pressing for evidence over and over, and he just kept lying, projecting, deflecting, and performing. The usual. And then the regulatory system started to fail. You could see it in his face. You could see the burnt sienna color starting to change to a tomatoey red. And the sweat was forming, and he kept talking faster. And I was checking his eyes to see if his pupils were dilated, because it seemed like they were definitely more dilated than they were at the beginning of the interview. His face was saying the whole thing, even when he was trying to say things that sounded like they were in control, even though to us they weren't. We talked about projective identification in an earlier episode. When that projected material, when that container gets overwhelmed and stops observing the projected material and gets pulled inside, an enactment. And Kristen Welker, she started to get pulled in, and you could see her anxiety rise. She was talking faster and louder as he was doing the same thing. She couldn't contain him. She didn't have the tools. Nobody in the room or around him seems to have the tools. That when the container finally failed, what came out wasn't an argument. It was a cascade, a discharge that was directed at Kristen Welker, a woman of color. First it was her show, her network, other networks, the election, and the country. That wasn't targeted aggression. That's flooding. And the target was a Black woman who refused to stop asking questions. Each item in the list says less about the actual target and more about the discharge. The psychic pressure had been building. You could see it in his face as the interview went on. And when the containing function finally failed to regulate him, it failed completely. It didn't come out as an argument or even as rage. It was an explosion. It was like a bomb went off in a barn in Wisconsin, and Welker got hit by the shrapnel because she was close enough. You know, she felt that heat. Her anxiety rose. You could see it. But she stayed in the room. And when he needed her, she was still standing, still steady enough to be there when he looked like he was about to fall over. And then this is the clinical detail I really want you to hold on to. He stopped saying we. He started to say your country, your corrupt system, your elections. He's the president of your country, by the way. Not that he'll let any of us forget it. But in that moment, any sense of a shared reality collapsed entirely. The country, the elections became something external and hostile. That's the self-referential worldview, doing what it does under pressure. When the system fails, everything outside of it becomes the enemy, including the country itself. I think it's important to stop and to say something important about how he's been looking. And I am a registered nurse. In order to become a nurse practitioner, you have to get a Bachelor of Science in Nursing, you have to pass the NCLEX, you have to become an RN, which I am. And when I was training to be a nurse, we learned how to make visual assessments. And when you look at him, even before the meltdown, he was puffy. His facial coloring, even with whatever spray tanner he was using, was off. He looked very puffy. He had this, it's called periorbital edema, that puffiness around his eyes that made it look like his eyes really weren't open all the way. And he also was sweating even before that. You know, he can't stand up straight or sit straight. And so he always does this forward lean. But I think even before we get to what happened when he tried to stand up and leave, we need to make a note about his declining health and how obvious it is. You don't have to be a doctor or a nurse to see it. And we can't just ignore it. We can't just normalize it. We have to keep in mind that this person has the nuclear codes, is trying to make deals with foreign countries that he started a war over for vanity. And he's so clearly out of his depth. And that was showing today in the barn in Wisconsin, well, yesterday. Because at one point, he couldn't take her asking him for evidence anymore. He just said he was done. And in the space of like 10 seconds, when she was pleading with him to stay and her register was going higher, once he got up though, he had to use his thighs to stand up because there weren't any arms on the chair. And he could not really readily balance himself. And he almost fell, when he crossed the midline, he almost fell into Kristen Welker. And when he touched her shoulder, that wasn't to be cute when he called her darling. That was because he was worried he was going to fall over. So you have to think about this self. This man declared himself to be too powerful to be questioned by a stupid, corrupt journalist who he couldn't get out of the room unless she supported him. You could see this omnipotence and the physical decline on camera in one moment. It was stunning. And that image is the whole series in one frame. At the end of every episode, I draw a tarot card, not to divine anything, but to represent what we've talked about today in a symbolic form, something that's more emotionally provocative. And today's card, we can consider a repeat, but not a repeat, because we've used this card before. And the card is the Tower. And before I show it to you, the version that I showed you before was from the Legacy of the Divine Tarot, where the structure, one of the legs was hit by lightning, but the structure itself was still standing. This is from the Tarot of the Spirit, and this deck is a little more pointed than that. Here is that version of the Tower. This isn't a structure being struck. This is a structure being consumed by lightning. Lightning didn't strike it. The lightning is it. It's destroying everything all at once, like a total discharge. And that's what we saw in that barn. No crack in the facade, no couple legs standing. Even the fact that he wobbled and could barely get out of the room showed the destruction that happened that day. Previous tower moments happened before this one, but they were mediated, most of them, even when he had some meltdowns in public. Even the overnight feed isn't as bad as this one. The tower blew up a barn in the rain with one journalist and a camera and very little else. The tower, unmediated, in real time. In this deck, very little survives the tower. But that's Kristen Welker. She made it out. I'm Dr. Marlene Ryle. Thank you for watching The World on the Couch. Please like, subscribe, and share. The couch is always open.